The farther we move along and we become multiple generations removed from the playing days, the way things are reported. You know, even when they had the lockout, there was a command from NBA headquarters, we're going to show basketball footage, but we're not going to show anything prior to 1992. I was like, well, you know, that people are going to watch basketball, and a generation of followers are going to be affected by this. And why wouldn't they let them know about what happened prior to 1992? It's almost like the NBA started in 1990 instead of 1946.
Now, Michael was 6'10", about 280.
Wow.
And
you're about half his size.
Yeah, he's a big guy.
George Mikan was just coming onto the scene. He was the leading scorer in the country for a couple of years there, and I think he was really responsible for being the first really dominant big player in basketball. And a lot of that was from working with Coach Meyer. You know, Ray Meyer came here as a young coach, and George Mikan was just developing as a player at that point. Ray did a lot of things that really revolutionized basketball with George, in the sense they worked speed bags and jumped rope and played ping pong and did a lot of things to work on George's hand-eye coordination. Had him do the Mikan drill, which is still named after him, the shooting with your left and right hand alternating at the basket. A lot of things like that were developed to develop a player of Mikan's size so that he could be the type of player he was and dominate not only college basketball, but he went on into the NBA, and they won championships in the NBA also, with him being a dominant player.
George was a very physical individual. He said, you've got to be a little aggressive to the point of sort of roughness.
And you can see in this film why, I hope, they became the most effective front line, and perhaps in basketball history. But compared to the next time there was a front line compared to them, it was Wilt Chamberlain, Chet Walker, and Lucius Jackson. Many years later.
Despite his great size, 6 feet 10 inches, he's a natural athlete and excels in just about any sport you'd care to name. In baseball, for example, many major league teams wanted to sign him up as a pitcher.
The giant could move with the speed of a lightweight, and when it came to scoring points, he was in a class by himself.
He was really a great player. Much greater than people. You never hear his name about when they talk to great players. But I think he won 4 or 5 championships in like 6 years.
Is Mr. Basketball himself, George Mikan, voted by the nation's top sports authorities in an Associated Press poll as the greatest basketball player of the half-century. Most of the other all-time sports greats have long since retired, but Mikan is still very much in action as the mainstay of the professional Minneapolis Lakers team.
The Lakers would have, we'd had a California play for Jim Pollard. We had a Texas play for Slater Martin. We had a Mikan play, which of course was 90% of the time. Get it into George and he'd put it in the hoop.
Now, did you learn a lot playing with Mikan?
Learned a lot as far as the ability to stay alive and what you had to do to gain some respect in the NBA, because George was a very physical individual, and during our training and practice, he worked me over pretty good, and he told me several times, he said, if you're going to stay in the league, he said, you've got to start being a little aggressive, and not only aggressive, but be to the point of sort of roughness in the inside.
We developed a play between Pollard and Mikan that really worked out. We call it a JG. Pollard would throw the ball into Mikan and cut, and George would either give it to him or turn around and take a left-hand hook shot. And they couldn't stop the play and get more baskets out of that, and won more games with that play alone.
Playing against the New York Knickerbockers, Mikan takes over the ball for the Lakers. This 6-foot, 10-inch tall star of stars tries for a basket and is fouled. Coming up is another score for the finest player of them all, the unbelievable Mikan.
Mikan was a giant among men.
No other man in basketball is as devastating as Mikan when it comes to playing the pivot position. Averaging nearly 24 points per game during the season, this all-time all-star has extraordinary scoring punch.
George Mikan was also a forgotten hero. He was a fellow 6'10" tall. And I remember I had to play against him one night when my center was out. And I studied how he played. And Mikan was a player who would always go to one spot. So I decided I'll get to the spot ahead of him. And he always went to his right side, so I'd overplay him on his right side. And I would box him off the boards because he was a great rebounder. And that night, when I played against him, I overplayed him on the right side. I got to the spot ahead of him, and I boxed him out, and I held him to 48 points.
Harrison fires to Mikan. And when Big George hits, it's 69-68 the Lakers.
He had some games where he had 54, 62. We had a pretty good ball club, and he destroyed us.
He was outstanding in his day, as the guys that are playing now are.
Doogie feeds Mikan, and it's good again.
In the early days of the NBA, the Minneapolis Lakers' George Mikan faced his younger brother Eddie, the center for the Chicago Stags. With friends and family looking on, George showed no brotherly love to Eddie, scoring on him at will and breaking his nose in the process.
The history of college basketball, the NIT was considered, I think, the more major of the tournaments. There were still both tournaments, but at that point, NIT, I think, was a little bit more prestigious. In the larger tournament, the better teams went to that tournament. So from DePaul's standpoint, there was a national championship.
When the pro campaign started, George was still top. His 28-point-per-game average was the best in the business.
Last spring, the Minneapolis Lakers won their 5th World's Championship in 6 years of league play when they beat the powerful Knickerbockers to do it. To build a great team, a championship team, you need the immense height and strength of men like Mikan. This doubles the effectiveness of every shot by maintaining control of the ball. If you miss the first, maybe you'll make the second. And if your opponent misses the first, he doesn't get a second chance. You need a man with the grace and skill of a ballet dancer and the fingertip control of a juggler. You know that Big George is the greatest basketball player of the century, was elected to that honor in an Associated Press poll, as a matter of fact, and you know that other teams know it. They figure if they can get George down to 10 or even 15 points a game instead of 35 or 50, they've got you beat. They've got to sag in on George and cover him like a blanket. George makes good in his second try, 85-81.
The league tried everything to slow down the Lakers, but they just had no answer for George Mikan. In fact, the Lakers won every title over a 7-year stretch, except for 1951. And that year, George was sidelined late in the season by a broken ankle. Now, since George's heyday, other players have scored more points and received more attention, but no one had more of an impact on the game. And when the history of the NBA is written, there is no better place to start than with George Mikan.